Yeah, both of ours.
Yeah, both of us are very heavy duty sessions. Right? 6 to 7, so chai pani karke aaya hai na?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I even had my dinner.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Namaste and greetings. I, Tripta Behra, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI Web Policy Learning. Today, we are gathered for day 2 of an online international autumn school program, a 1-month immersive online intermediate certificate training course on contours of the public policy in India in the Amrit Kaal. This training course is organized by IMPRI, Center for the Study of Finance and Economics, CSFE. This course will be chaired by Professor Mukul, visiting distinguished professor IMPRI, former professor Lee Kuan School of Public Policy, National University of Singapore, NUS. The panel of conveners comprises of Dr. Devendra Singh, Senior Visiting Fellow IMPRI, Dr. Simi Mehta, CEO and Editorial Director IMPRI, and Dr. Arjun Kumar, Director IMPRI. The experts for today's session are Mr. V. Ramakrishnan and Professor Mukul. I welcome all of you to this enlightening deliberation and thank you for being interested and putting your time, energy, and efforts into understanding emerging issues pertaining to the Indian subcontinent and helping us to bring together the practitioners and participants through this course for impactful policy research and action. We have also shared the course outline and reading resources in your email for your kind perusal. Before we start today's session, I would like to remind the housekeeping rules once again. Please join the meeting on time. There will be a Q&A session after each presentation. Kindly share your questions in the Q&A box. The questions must not be posted as an anonymous attendee. Ensure that your questions are precise and kindly refrain from making any general comments in order to save time. Now, without further ado, let us start the program. Our first expert for today's session on knowing doing gap in public policies is Mr. V. Ramakrishnan, Managing Director, Organization Development, Singapore. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
If you could please take it from here. Over to you, sir.
Right. Now to share my screen. What happened? Yeah, there it is. Hey, something's gone wrong, wonky again. Okay, you're on screen?
Yes, sir. It's with me.
Okay. Now I have to get my screen so I can see it. Okay, dollar done.
But it's not full screen. You can try full screen.
Yeah, I'll do that now. 1 minute. Let me get it organized one by one. Because sometimes it comes on the top. Yeah, play. There you go. Now you're saying full screen?
Yes, sir.
Are you okay with it?
Yes, sir. Good to go.
1 minute. So there's something else that's come. Yeah, now I have moved it back. Okay. Okay, there it goes. Good evening and thank you for having me over on this session. This is you asked me for some reading material. There is only one article on this written by people Baldacci and co who I've referred to here. It's an extremely dense paper to read, so I didn't circulate it. Second, it is a highly academic paper in the sense that while the facts are all very conducive and reasoned, well reasoned, it's not the easiest of papers to read and relish. So trust me that I'll take you through the summary of this, right? See, I start with my favorite two tigers, beautiful animals. And I'm saying that doing, in the context of the knowing, doing things on public policies, doing is the compass. Knowing is the GPS. In an interactive audience, I would have asked what's the difference between a compass and a GPS. But in this case, I'll just point out that compass sets the direction, whereas GPS gives you a holistic view, right? Of where you are, which direction you're going, how are you headed, where are the pitfalls, where is there traffic, and so on and so forth. Basic public policy has to be seen as GPS, and all the schemes and programs associated with it should be seen as compasses, right? This is the basic that I'm using, and then moving on to cover. Basically, this topic becomes very important because people work in comfort zones. They know, but they don't do. Take, for example, the electricity in India. Everybody knew that 18,000 villages were not enabled with electricity. But what did they do about it? They invented reasons. It's too far, it's too difficult, very few people are going to service, and so on and so forth. The same thing happened in taxation. We knew our taxation was high, but we didn't do anything about it. The emerging reality is unknown and or uncertain. So there's a fear of the unknown, and that limits our thinking, and I shall explain that in detail. Policy framers need to understand what these uncertainties are. And the real issue is the human mind does not like uncertainty. Therefore, it has to be a forced construct to understand. And that's the knowing part of it. Doing is easy. Everybody likes to run around, get things going, and push things. But the knowing requires enormous amount of attention and detail. And policies have to be framed to address the emerging needs and wants, not what happened 10 years ago. Right? So we have to not look at So that's the sort of horizons we must have. The knowledge gap has to be understood to deliver value and outcomes to citizens. In all my sessions at IMPRI, I have hit upon this need to maintain outcomes. This is the fundamental requirement of policy. Policy is not about who should do what, when, which, what are the travel allowances, what's the leave travel allowances. Those are all important, but not relevant policies in delivering outcomes to citizens. So basically, we have to decide what has to be delivered to whom, by when, and at what cost. This is the outcomes that any policy has to deliver, right? Now we're sticking to the public policy domain, so I'm doing it within the public policy domain. Now, if you look at this, and you look at this chart a bit patiently, it's a very dense chart. The x-axis is where knowledge and competence on the left is high, and on the right rectangle, it's low. The issues and challenges are known. And then on the y-axis on the top, we have unknown challenges. Now, this arrow box is the zone of comfort for all of us. This is where incremental performance is very satisfying. Last year, we had a 6% growth over last year in tax collections. It's great. But is the tax collection sufficient to meet the programs that you have to deliver? That nobody questions. This quadrilateral is the zone of comfort, which is wonderful for administration and execution. It's rule-based. It is defined. The do's and don'ts are clear. There's no uncertainty. And if there's any uncertainty, there are always exceptions, and who should handle the exceptions. And there are a whole host of rules for that. Now, the issue is when you have to manage and you have to direct, if you separate it, what's the near-term vision? You need substantial improvement programs. This is near term. Let's not mistake it. If you have the Aadhaar scheme, it is not going to last you for 25 years. It is one thing that was required. It happened for a couple of years. Now the whole of the country is covered. It's an improvement program. Move on. And move on to what? Move on to strategic purpose and vision. What is the innovation here? I shall explain that in a minute. And then, of course, you have to understand that even the lowest level functionary has a role in governance. And for that, the organization structure, which enforces accountability, integrity, and probity, is vital. For that set of transformational strategies to drive the strategic vision, the mission, and the near-term performance, there is an ongoing and a continuous need for capacity development. Right now, capacity development is not about attending seminars. It's about making a visible difference to the constituency that supports you, namely the citizens of the country in terms of public policy. I'll give you a few examples. I've not chosen to use the names of the programs because I want this to be apolitically neutral. But I guess those who are interested would be able to find out what is what. For example, what were the fundamental that known, what knowledge was high and challenges were known? What were the first things that were done? Streamlining bureaucracy. They had to come to work at 9:30. They couldn't go out for a game or a meal at casual times. The second most important thing in my estimate was Aadhaar. Aadhaar was not new. Aadhaar was done by Nandan Nilekani in 2010-11. But Aadhaar could not be it on its own, so they had to promote internet access, which they rolled out very rapidly through a very corruption-free regime. Then there were agricultural schemes. I'm not going into the details of the scheme because there's a whole host of schemes, essentially making the Annadatas more profitable in whatever sense it is. Electrification and water were addressed. Social security concerns were addressed. All these were known. All these were in the comfort zone. And what it needed was a push to deliver. So this is what I mean, the zone of comfort, right? There is nothing challenging about it. Aadhaar is a number. It has got privacy. Somebody else has worked out the whole scheme. We can use it for a whole host of things like what? DBT, pension schemes, alternate energy, defense production, infrastructure development, banking reforms. These were all the unknowns. Why do I say a defense production, for example? We have had defense production for the last 70 years. I myself have visited many of the defense factories when I was a supplier to them. We had enormous infrastructure, but very poor competency. That has been pushed through sheer policy measures, which is very strategic in nature, which I'll come to. And I've deliberately kept this to the right, because while I've put it into a box, many of these unknowns spread into 2-3 areas. It's not something that you can just put it into a cube, but unfortunately, when you have a 2-dimensional PowerPoint, this is what you can do. Take banking reforms. Everybody knew, the knowledge was very high, that there was a lot of reforms required in the banks, right? But there are a lot of external pressures on the banks. And that is what limited it. And this was addressed through policy measures. Now, when I take direction, what were the fundamental strategic decisions and innovative decisions that they took referring to? Digital transformation was a phenomenal movement for us. It was based around the India stack. And for those who are new to it, Aadhaar gave the level of identity. UPI and RuPay gave it a transactional element. And now taking it up into banking and taking it up into Paytm and stuff like that, beyond RuPay, it's become a transaction method that is a lot more paper-free than ever before in the past and increasing rapidly. Another strategic decision that was taken was blue water strategy. It was not about the pollution in the Ganga. It was how to lower cost of transport by using our vast network of rivers, because people must realize that transporting by water costs 1% that of transferring by road. It was a strategic, out-of-the-box thinking and an innovation. Nothing new. The British built the Buckingham Canal in Chennai only for moving goods from the hinterland to the Madras port way back in the 1850s. Take missile production. We used to be very casual producers of missiles. Now we have a full armament going from a few tens of kilometers to a few thousand kilometers to hypersonic missiles. Out-of-the-box thinking, leveraging technology, no joint ventures, but except in BrahMos, get on with it. And you're seeing alternate fuel has already moved into hydrogen fuel, and it is being enabled through very strategic measures. So here again, you see the public policy has been pushed out of its comfort zone, first into DBT and such, which impacts the routine lives of people. Second, into direction setting, which is going to stand India's people in good stead in the long term. And the transformational dimensions, which we have seen in our lifetimes in the last 10 years, is COVID management. The knowledge was low. The challenges were known. People knew that it was extremely difficult to make a vaccine. Free nutrition. Because of the DBT and linked to the PDS, free nutrition became possible. That goes back to the digital transformation in India stack. The Make in India pushed the missile production, hydrogen fuel, and so on and so forth. Then the PLI scheme is the electronics in this country is going very rapidly, vaccine development, and then space exploration. Now, I've just chosen a few typical examples to show you that out-of-the-box thinking is fundamental. And for this, you must know. That's the knowledge part of it. The second part is the doing part of it, which I will address in the next few minutes. And most vitally, on capacity development, online education, the Agniveer scheme. Agniveer scheme is an enormous capacity development element, which requires a separate session in itself. It is so deep and so vast. And I have met a lot of youngsters across the country who are very enamored with the scheme. And remember, in the process, we are creating a highly disciplined youth, maybe just 10, 15,000 a year, but still in 10 years, that's quite a bit. And then there are a lot of teaching learning schemes, e-learning, Y-learning, Z-learning, so on and so forth. So here is an example of how you move out of your zone of comfort. And you have to work hard to know what is required. And I'll take you through the rest of the session about the things that are required. And these are developed by Mukul and I over many sessions. So there's very little reading on this per se that I can offer. My apologies. Now, Knowing and Doing gap in policy framing was originally written by the authors, Vecchi and Brusoni, for addressing the latent issues in the Italian public administration. Now, the India administrative services world over share a common ethos. So there's nothing new, right? So the gaps that are identified is something that we need to look at. In the knowing part of it, we have a planning gap. If you don't know what the market requires, can you plan? Without the knowledge, how good is your planning? And can you do the whole effort individually, or do you need partners? In the doing, you have to select carefully what has to be done. In the governance, you have to oversee what is being done with a lot of integrity, and then you have to force execution. So from the left, you're identifying the uncertainty. We don't know what is required, but we have to plan for it. Once we know what we have to plan for, we may not have the knowledge for it. Once we know what to plan for and have the knowledge for it, we may not be able to do it on our own. And once we know, we realize we can't do it on our own, we have to select elements that we can attack to deliver what I will explain. Then you need a governance model to ensure that it is rolled out scientifically, and then you have to execute. So broadly speaking, these gaps have to be addressed in framing public policy. In other words, policy planners need to be competent in all these areas and realize what they know and what they don't know. So what is planning? First is clarity in defining outcomes. Right? If that is not clear, for example, when we had 4 Mbps internet, we were all thrilled. But you couldn't do your the India stack on 4 Mbps. We had to raise it. So it went up to 20, 25. Now, even in a remote place like Kunnur, I get 150 Mbps. It's the defining of the outcome. And then specific cost benefit. If you are going to charge me, for example, the old VPN rates in these hills used to be 2 lakhs a year. Today, my bill for broadband is 1,000 rupees a month. So there has to be a specific cost benefit beyond which people will not take it. Knowledge gap. You have to identify cause and effect. We cannot assume cause and effect. We have to have a very detailed scientific temper to understand what causes what and how it has affected us. So in medical terms, you don't cure the symptom, you cure the cause. Then long-term VFM. VFM is value for money. Now, this is one of the banes of public policy, where we take short-term decisions and believe that a series of good short-term decisions will make a good long-term decision. That's not true. You have to take a long-term view and work backwards to deliver the short-term, near-term, medium-term, and short-term. To do this, we need to understand the motivations of our client base. In public policy, our clients are the citizens. In public policy, our clients are the international community, right? We have a very vast and diverse set of people whose motivations you have to understand. And then there is a value conflict. If I'm going to get military hardware from the US, it conflicts with their value system of whom they should give it to and whatnot. But can we restrict our public policy because of these value conflicts? We need to work a way around them, and that is what international engagement and the external affairs management is all about. And I'm taking real examples so that we can see what's happening around us in a very apolitical manner. Let's not be political about whether it's right or wrong. That's a secondary issue. We can have that discussion offline, but not in this course. Selection. What are the objectives of all this? Right? And what is the goal conflict? We need to manage goal conflicts. As the saying goes in public policy, it's not a question of what is right or wrong. It is always a question of what you should have more of and what you should have less of. This is implicit in public policy, right? If I have high-speed internet and broadband, it's a necessity to dig up the roads. It's also a necessity to make up the roads which we don't do, right? And governance is about 4 issues. A strategic approach, what is the strategy? What is the structure? How are you going to root the strategy? What are the systems? And what is the risk management framework? Whenever you do a policy statement, it derives from strategy. It cannot stand on its own. So there's no point saying, I have a right to Information Act. And what is the strategy? Not to give the details on demand. The strategy is to have an open, transparent society. That is good governance. But we know how the RTI is going and how it can be skewed. Same thing with the MNREGA stand. MNREGA was a handout. The strategy was it is a handout. And now it is being converted into a value-adding proposition. And for that, you need a structure, which is worked through the state governments, for which there's a systems in which the district collector and the panchayats are involved. But there's very little risk management in that because it's a very vast area which is ignored. Then in execution, it is about people, processes, and product. You need to have a good product. Aadhaar is a good product. Jandan schemes are good products, and so on and so forth. Unless you have a good product, it will not sell, even if you give it for free. Then sound processes, and most importantly, good people who are conscious of time and cost in their management of this situation. Very high level. I'll go into a lot of details here in the next few slides, but this is very high level. Knowledge about citizens' expectations is vital. Now, is citizen one massive block, or is it a whole host of people? You have people below the poverty line. If you look at our shape of the citizen's profile, it is a very broad base, narrow middle, and an even narrower top. It's like a very narrow pyramid. But in the next 20 years, it's going to become narrower at the bottom, lot of middle, and flatter at the top, but wider. The number of millionaires is estimated is going to climb manifold now. Clarity of deliverables. You have to be absolutely clear what is to be delivered. Right? Understanding underlying economic principles. You cannot do this based on pie in the sky understanding of economics. And unfortunately, in some public policy formulations, this is not incorrect. Implications of financial commitments. The best thing that comes to mind is the oil bonds. The country has suffered for 15 years because the oil bonds were not fully assessed for the financial commitments and the ability to pay it back. And a long-term thinking, I've already pointed out, and cross-functional management. Cross-functional management and public policy is really about various departments coming together. Now, it is called the group of ministers meeting. It's not a question of grouping. It is the managing of the cross-functional nature. Sitting down and saying, okay, you do this, do this, because all of us have a common outcome. What is that outcome? Is defined by the value for money goals in a phased manner. You cannot go from 0 to 100 in 1 second. It's going to take time, but it has to be calibrated depending upon the vehicle, the road condition, the driver, fuel, and so on and so forth. And last but not the least are your institutional strengths, which have been lukewarm over the years. We know it. It takes an enormous amount of time to strengthen it. Work is in progress, but still a long ways to go. You cannot make public policy with weak institutions. The second thing is we must be knowledgeable about partner selection. It's not a question of who gives us the best deal. It's a question of who will help us deliver value for money. And setting realistic strategic outcomes. No point saying I'm going to the sun. And somebody said, don't go, sun is very hot. So he said, I'll go in the night time. That's not the sort of outcomes that you should. Right? Project management and coordination skills. Now, this is a weak area overall in the public policy space. There are specialist organizations, but in general, every department has to be a project management because all of them are getting projects from the budget. It's done through schemes and all sorts of mechanisms. But how many are really aware of project management as a fundamental requirement for doing things. Financial management, I've already stressed on risk management. Board governance versus policy governance, right? Board governance is talked about. Policy governance is rarely talked about. Completely different areas. Sadly, I won't have the time to address that. Understanding communication and technologies. Now, we have gone overboard. For example, the IT department this year gave me a revised tax due, right? I have paid the revised tax due on the day I had the receipt. They're still pointing out and telling me with a series of emails and SMS messages that the original tax demand that they claimed before revision has not been paid. It's actually ridiculous, right? They're talking about technology, but they're misusing technology. But it's very vexing to receive these SMSs and continuing to provide proof that it has been paid. Encouraging innovation. You know, there are 721 Atal innovation centers open around the country where children can go and tinker. That's where it starts. Innovation is not a structured, orderly process. Creation, by its very essence, is a wasteful process. It's not an issue. Of course, don't tell my wife that when she cooks, right? And performance management, the monitoring and evaluation, even today in public policy, is very weak. Parliament should really sit down and look at M&D and just not go through the Public Accounts Committee or whatever it is. Opposition and ruling should sit down and evaluate performance against the policy goals. That's not happening, sadly, in our country. So, the knowing-doing gap, this one slide is a very busy slide. I'll try to explain it step by step. So, you have to understand what the expectation is. This is called marketization. It's a word that Mukul uses often. Essentially, you have to let the market evolve the policy requirements. You can't define a policy and say, here it is, come and take it. There's needs analysis for which you need quite profound knowledge. You cannot buy it from consultants, right? And you need a solution orientation. So if you're doing knowing from a purely academic point of view, it's useless. You have to learn to provide solutions. And the legitimacy. You have the governance architecture, you have the sovereign power which can be misused and used. You need leadership, you need implementation skill set, and you need problem solving and experiential learning. Now I'm reframing this, saying when you're framing policy, look at these 4 quadrants. This will help you zoom in on what area, This will help you zoom in on what you should be doing to focus on. If you're not competitive, the lower known box, if you're not efficient, focus first on that. So you need to get to know more about this. If you're productive but not competitive, learn to get productive. In India, productivity is abysmal. I've mentioned this often in your seminars. It's competitive but not productive. We sell purely on price. That is what China is doing. It's a price arbitrage which cannot last forever. Then the real target is to become competitive and productive, right? And you now see that in cell phones and the like, we are getting very competitive. But where are we on components for electronics? We're not competitive and we're not productive. So the PLI schemes are now focusing on the elements that are required for the electronics industry. We have a problem with high quality steels. That is also being encouraged, and so on and so forth. Electric vehicles, that's also being encouraged, right? And we are there. India is one of the largest producers of EV two-wheelers. So now I've recast what I've told you and said, look, here is how it looks. Knowledge gap helps you address the unknown. The learning challenge, when you have knowledge gap and you have a partnership gap, partnership gap helps you address strategic issues. Partnership gap helps you address innovation and transformation. The planning gap is very operational. It works within your zone of comfort. And the doing challenge, once you have planned it right, is in a very comfortable area because the public policy and the public system has got excellent methods for doing things. Except it may be very inefficient, and that has to be tweaked. And what should be efficient, what should be productive, I just showed you in the earlier slide. This is a management challenge. This is a governance challenge. I've just reframed whatever points I had put there as understanding underlying economic principles in each relevant box. That's all I have done. I will explain each one in detail now. It's not so important to focus on this. There are 3 levels that we are looking at. Okay. Planning gap, knowledge gap, and partnership gap. This is the first level. If you look at the knowing diagram I told you on the left, these are the 3 gaps that we have to address. The doing challenge, learning challenge, innovation challenge, and people challenge is common to both knowing and doing. There are 22 parameters involved in this, covering management and governance issues. I'm just listed out these parameters, but this has already been discussed. I'll now go in and discuss each one of these sequentially. Right? Closing the planning gap. Right? Who is the customer and what is he willing to pay? Do our policy framers understand this? Right? The chief economic advisor puts out a very detailed study ahead of the budget. It's a very nice document, and Mukul and I have worked closely with the current CEA. He's a very knowledgeable person, very hands-on and very on the ground. But is it sufficient to understand what the people need once a year? For example, during COVID, if you had said, let me wait for the next CEA report before we decide what to do, it would have been pointless. So there has to be a continuous updation and clarity in defining the outcomes. And that comes from basically treating citizens as customers. What has to be delivered to whom, by when, at what cost? That's the cost benefit that you're talking about. And cost to the government is important, cost to the citizen is important. And the benefit that has to be delivered centers around 2 things, the needs and the wants, which I will cover now. Policy framing requires a scientific temper. For example, if you want to get good health in the citizenry, you have to focus on nutrition, not on building more hospitals. Because hospitals are designed to treat ill health. Hospitals are not designed to promote health. So your millet scheme, your PDS getting better quality of food stuff reaching out, those are all fundamental basic issues. It's the root cause. What you need to focus on is productivity, and productivity requires good infrastructure. If you are able to estimate this, if the city traffic jams in India's major cities are stopped, our fuel saving bill will be around 20%. It runs into several lakh crores. But we are stuck. Building highways is great. It's fantastic. I've driven on many of these highways. They are superb. But it's high time we started focusing on the inner cities. The long-term value for money congruence. Very often, we take short-term gains because the government is in power for 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, whatever it is. We take the short term and say we have to get ready for the next election. Probably one of the reasons for incumbency factor in India is very few governments take a long-term view. Good public policy framing is you have to know what the value for the long term that you have to deliver. So my question is, again, the lack of interaction, I'll answer it myself. Why do you build highways? Is it for cars to go faster? Or is it to increase commerce and trade? So should you build a highway between areas where there's potential for commerce and trade? Right? We have done this study actually in one of our programs. You know, if you build a 1,000-kilometer railway, what you earn from the railway is insignificant. If there are 10 trains going up and down in a day and there are 10 stops, 100 stops, each stop, if the train 872 people sitting in a 12-bogie plane, even if they spend 50 rupees each, you can calculate what they are going to earn. So we have to understand what we have to deliver and what should be the long-term delivery that we have to focus on. So that's the long-term thinking. Now, if you look at partnership gap, who is the partner? In public policy, your partner is the citizen. First and foremost, it is the citizen. And our consultative mechanisms for understanding what citizens need in this country needs a lot of strengthening. Organs of government, center and state, if they keep fighting with each other like this, there is no wholesome definition of what a state requires. It's all a question of biases working. Civil society organizations, let's not underestimate the need and ability of NGOs. I don't like the word, the civil society organizations, to be an intermediary between the government as a communication and linking tool, which I mentioned earlier. They're excellent at communication. Lots of them are doing wonderful work in the areas that I live in. Partner countries, that's the importance of FTA. Collaborating entities. In recent times, we have heard of GE, NASA, Dassault, that's the Rafale production. So these are all potential partners. Now there's a value conflict. You want something, the partner wants something. Is it affordable? Is it Does it meet your requirements? Again, the knowing issue. So when you're looking at partners, it's not a question of identifying a financially strong partner. It's a question of identifying a partner who can give you what you want. Then, of course, understanding motivations of citizens. The simplest is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I won't go into today, but tomorrow when I do the session, I will cover that in some depth. So what is it that the citizen wants? He wants employment. He has to be made employable, quality of living and quality of life. This is the knowledge public framers must have. I'll explain quality of life and quality of living. Quality of living is basic needs: food, clothing, shelter, healthcare, basic transport, so on and so forth. Quality of life is the aspirational points. You don't want a public health center. You want a multi-speciality hospital. You don't want to have a high school. You want to have a diploma or a graduate engineering program. You don't want to have a simple dispensary. You want to have medically trained doctors, so on and so forth. Right? There are a lot more aspirations. We won't get into it now. These are the higher end ones. So policies have to primarily help improve quality of living. You know, people are talking about environment destruction and so on. It's all very valid. Right? But is your job to prevent environment destruction and not build roads, not provide electricity, not build water lines, all of which destroy the environment. All of which destroy the environment. And in one of the sessions at IMPRI, I had pointed out that 91% of the carbon footprint comes from buildings. Everybody ignores it. Yes, we can reduce the running carbon generation, but the totality of it is, can we be without buildings? Why not we build all mud shelters? It's not practical. So you have to understand that fundamentally providing quality of living is what bothers the man on the street, especially when the triangle is so broad at the base. And the higher quality of life, multi-speciality hospitals, it's all going to come. Today we are an average age of 28. When all of these people reach 50, they are going to require multi-speciality hospitals. But should the policy planner only plan PHCs? Or should he also be planning at multi-speciality hospitals? To staff a multi-speciality hospital with specialist doctors, it's going to take at least 15 years, 5-7 years of education, 10 years of practice, and then coming into multi-speciality hospitals. So this is where the long term cannot be sacrificed for the short term. PHC is important. Private hospitals are important. State hospitals are important. Multi-speciality hospitals are important. And across the spectrum, it's a health-based need. Similarly with food. So how do you do this? Please understand, planning is always a WIP. It's work in progress. There's nothing called planning and policy which is firm and set. You set a goal for 2024, it's going to change midway through into 2025. So the principles of policy planning cannot be restricted to one effort in December, January, and the publication of the budget in February. It has to be an ongoing exercise, a continuous exercise, and a continuous tweaking, which I believe has started to happen. Value propositions change with time. The customer value proposition is something that the government of India delivers through their products and services to create loyalty and satisfaction in targeted customer segments. What below the poverty line people value is not something that a millionaire would value, right? Except maybe reduction in traffic. So they consist of product and service attributes, customer relationships, and the image. The image is important. If people trust the government and they have the image that it is a clean government, they will support it. Now, this is the fundamental requirement when I told you early on that the policy framers have to start understanding the markets. This is an 8-cornered matrix which varies by industry and has to be worked out in great depth. And the point is it morphs. It doesn't stay constant, right? Today we have, 15 years ago, if we got a cell phone in our hands, we were happy. Today we want a PDA, right? And we want a dual SIM one. You don't want something that it has to be 5G enabled and it should be ready for 6G. This is what I call the morphing. Same thing happens in your fashion sense, same thing happens in your food requirements, same thing happens in your footwear. So it continuously keeps changing. And policy framers have to provide for it. For example, you've built fantastic roads. What happens if the automotive car industry grows at 6% per year for the next 30 years? Will your roads be sufficient? I have my reservations. As it is, gridlocks are becoming not uncommon. How do you do this? Firstly, when you're doing any strategic thinking, the focus for policymakers is to understand what is there behind it. Look behind you, understand what has happened in the past, right? Then look below you. Look at people who have not done as well as you. Then look at in nations which have done better than you. Then look beyond. Look at the side. Don't continuously compare with China, 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 and China. Right? Look ahead. The Chinese model is failing. But we are still saying we are going to be China +1, which I think is ridiculous. We have to look through and identify, having seen what China has done, having seen what Vietnam has done, having seen what Japan has done, or having seen how Korea has done, having seen how they succeeded, how they failed. We have to develop our own model of public policy through regular scenario thinking. Scenario-based knowledge-driven thing is not a question of more of the same or a trend analysis. It's a question of analyzing plausibilities and requires an enormous amount of research and study. For example, will food habits transform in a generation? You're pushing millets, right? Will people stop eating rice? Healthcare demands. I've already pointed this out. It's going to change in 15 years. And it's going to be, your children are going to have better nutrition. So you don't need to attend certain things. Already our population ratios are getting into near stagnant levels. So you're going to see a lot of improvement in health. So what more is required? It's not as though people are not going to remain healthy all the time. There is going to be ill health. What are you going to do? You need to know it. The clarity of thinking that is required. Right? Operational tweaks versus strategy-led transformation. This is very important. In the knowing part, in the zone of comfort, we love incremental improvements. GDP is growing at 6%. We're very happy, right? It does not matter if people don't get electricity. It does not matter if they don't get water. It does not matter if they don't get fuel at a reasonable price, but we are growing. Then comes the substantial improvements part. We want people to lead a much easier life, and you can see the impact on the GDP. It's already climbed substantially, and the benefit is we're going to get a lot more people into the taxpayer bracket within the next few years. That's transformational. The most important thing is to go through breakthrough. Now, the breakthrough part is what I mentioned earlier in the lower right quadrant. It is not structured. It is loose. But our Chandrayaan mission is a breakthrough. Right? Our India stack, while it is strategic and innovative, it is also a breakthrough. The world wants it. Right? Our Tejas is a breakthrough product. It may have taken 30 years in the building. That does not matter. Today, it is real. It is live. And that is being derived because it's a change-enabled strategy. We could not afford to go on buying and all the politicking that went with it. So these changes, if you're going to have breakthrough or transformational, it has to be strategy-led. Right? This is the trajectory that's required. Right? I'm drawing it for 45 degrees, but obviously it's not a straight line. It meanders along. You have some incremental work part of it. You have a substantial change part of it. You have the transformational part of it. You have the breakthrough part of it. And it involves policy, people, and processes. All three integrated simultaneously. That is performance-centric governance, customer-centric governance. Right? Now, transformation is change. I'll go through it quickly. People often misunderstand it. Transformation has a permanence to it. Change has a quality of impermanence and the flux. Change is ever-present and all-encompassing. For example, if I take aluminum ore, rock, convert it to aluminum ingot and make a cylinder block, I cannot take the cylinder block and make it ore again. It is a transformation. But technically, it's a change because I can melt the aluminum and reuse it. But the transformation is when a caterpillar becomes a pupae, becomes a caterpillar. The butterfly can never become a caterpillar. So we should not be looking at change management. Policy framers have to see a combination of change and transformation. We have to be transformative in limited areas, depending upon what is required and what we can afford, and change that which will enable the quality of improvement and quality of living and quality of life at a nominal cost. How do you do this? For any sector, you look at the national outcomes that you want. Then you cascade it, sectoral outcomes. Okay, you want a GDP growth of 8. which means in real terms, and an inflation of 5, you need to have a real growth of 13%. Which sector is going to facilitate it? Obviously, agriculture can go at 3-4%. So you need to identify high growth sectors. Within these sectors, you need to have an industry. Within these industries, you need corporates which you need to target. And then you look at individual outputs. So now do you understand the rationale of the PLI schemes? The lower part of it is quality of living, and the upper part of it is quality of life. And here are some of the sample measures. This is by no means complete. I would say national outcomes is improve per capita. Sectoral objectives is competitiveness. Corporate productivity, growth and profitability. If growth and profitability are high, my tax collection goes up. If my individual productivity is high, my bonuses are higher and I'm able to spend more. So consumption increases. So all these have cannonball effects, which we need to develop over time. Right? Now, from a political perspective, what are the objectives? They have to fulfill the economic and social functions. They have to generate value. They have to provide continuity for commercial viability. They manage the political environment. And there's a role of form, fit, and functionary. This is very important for political governance. The form is what people see. The fit are the processes, and the functionary is the people. It's the functionary which largely influences the political perspective, because the policy framers take guidance from their political masters. And the policy framers can be very profound influencers, or they can be flip-flop over whatever is required. And a large part of our 70 years, it's been a bit of a flip-flop. From the state level economic development, it's an income generator. It's a social entrepreneur, the state. It's a holistic renewer, employer and employment generator, regulator, market player, and is a visionary. All these require policy support. How do you do it? There are only 4 issues that are available to anybody. You have resources, only 2, capital and cash. Inputs, plant and machinery, and knowledge. Knowledge comes with people. You deliver goods and services, and you deliver outcomes. This is all there is to it. So taking all the other areas that require policy thing, you have to understand where it impacts this. And then develop your. So that's the knowing part. So you have to know what is economical. You have to understand efficiency, and you have to have a deep, profound feeling for effectiveness, because ultimately what it matters is being effective. I can be less economic, less efficient, but if I'm more effective. There's no point being highly economical, highly efficient, but being ineffective. Right? This is where the saying goes that the operation was a success, but the patient died. You want the patient to live, even if it takes a little while longer. Right? And this is what gives you the cost effectiveness, or what we call value for money. This is the core of public policy and needs to be internalized in the knowing part. And if you take this map and apply it to all the other things as a matrix, you will find a lot of clarity comes out of this. Right? Now, what is the cause and effect? This is the cause and effect. Let's take the banking system in India. What happened? Why was it that they were capital starved? What happened when they were capital starved? We know why they were capital starved. We won't get into that. They were not able to fund asset creation. So their liabilities increased. Their costs increased. Their value addition to the citizen decreased. They could not give loans. Loans had a very high interest rate, and their operating profits were low. Then they're taxed and levied, and if your operating profit is low, your taxes are low, so you don't have enough of working capital or cash, and no free cash in banks. You don't have surplus funds, you're still forced to give out the surplus funds. And consequences, the NPA. What has really happened in the banking system? Let's analyze the policy framework. Banks didn't have surplus funds, so governments funded it. They recapitalized the banks, who were then able to use that capital to create assets, both fixed and current, through their loans. They were able to reduce their cost. They came up with the cost of the minimum cost of transaction and so on and so forth. That's come down. They were able to add value. And this year they've had bumper profits, and going forward is going to be higher. So now the banking system has free cash. So they will fund growth. Hence the cause and effect analysis. This is a very simple example I've chosen as a bank. But if you look at agriculture, it's a lot more difficult. If you look at health, it's a lot more complex. If you look at defense, it's a lot more complex. But understanding cause and effect is something that's fundamental to the knowing part of this whole effort. Now, I'm just using an example of PPP as an indicator of motivations. PPP is an institution builder and has to deliver outcomes to the citizens. It's accountable. very difficult to determine. Is it a marriage or a relationship? If it's a marriage, the policy constraints are different. If it's a relationship, the policy constraints are different. For example, if two government departments get into a PPP or a government and a private sector get into a BPP, local company, it can be termed a marriage. But if you're talking about a third party funded by World Bank or other multinational institutions, it's more like a relationship. So each party is powerful. They have their independent motivations. And we need to understand when you're looking at partners, this sort of a framework to understand exactly what the other party wants is very important to setting up a PPP. I won't get into more. Now, how do you bridge these gaps? So far, I've done the knowing part of it. I'm now moving, and I may take 5 minutes more. Is that okay, Mukul?
That's fine, but leave some time for questions.
Yeah. So bridging the doing gaps. This is a chart made by Mukul from the World Development Report. When you're doing all the wonderful things that I said above is fantastic, but you have to fit it into all of this. This is not one or the other. You have to do all of this every year, year after year, month after month. So I come to the second part, the selection gap, the governance gap, and the execution gap, which is pretty much the same. I'll now go through this in detail. You have to set objectives to enhance prosperity. This is the quality of living. This is, you have to increase incomes. Increasing income is not about reducing taxes. That's one side to it. Income generation is different from taxation. Similarly, quality of life is possible only when you have wealth. So policy framers, when they do these things, they have to ensure both income growth and wealth growth in wealth. You can see, when policies work and the SIP products were introduced, the stock market is booming. That's wealth creation. The wealth gets created only if there is income. So you have to do both simultaneously. And that's one of the aims of doing things right, is to understand that from a citizen's perspective, I need an enhanced income and I need to increase wealth. Right? So how do you do it? What are the possible strategies for delivering sustained value? So you have two choices, value creation and value restoration. In the traditional agricultural setup, we are doing value restoration. But in defense technologies, we are doing a lot of value creation. In telecom, we are doing a lot of value creation. How do you do it? Understand the global scenario, understand the national ethos. Everything that the West does is not required by us. Everything that the West does not do does not mean we don't need it. We have to be clear about the global scenarios. This influences our growth potential. It defines our resource requirements. Potential choices are before us, and then you develop the policies. When you do it, you decide the growth rate and potential and our ability to deliver FM. So, in summary of this part of it, the policy framer, when he has to do something, he has to learn to sense what's happening and he has to learn to respond. And he has to do this seamlessly, which is why it's an ongoing, continuous work in progress. It cannot be a one-off effort. Right? Interestingly, when you come to governance, there's a lot of misconception about governance. Governance, root word is Kubernetes, which is the steersman. In cyber, it's also the root word for cybernetics, which is defined as the connectedness and feedback from systems. So good governance, and let us face it, the principle, governments in democracies don't rule, they govern. We should stop talking about the ruling party. It's a governing party. It's a framework. Governance is a framework. It's a system and requires the government to stay connected. If you don't have feedback from the population, that connectedness is gone and you cannot tune your systems to deliver. So how is value created? How is value upheld? What courses, how do you decide what course to take, the GPS part of it, to deliver sustained value using ethical methods? And the three pillars are accountability, integrity, and value creation. This has to be an integral part of the policy framework, right? Of course, this is a very good definition of how effective governance works, right? Here, thankfully, they are not pulling each other's legs. So it's a clear understanding of strategy, sound structure, very purposeful systems, foolproof processes, and informed evaluation of risk. This is a 10-step process. I won't get into it, right? It's a readiness assessment. It's a World Bank framework. It's available on the web. Performance indicators, key result areas. I've already done that program for IMPRI in a different session, so you know about that. But this is fundamental. You need to understand this. And the knowing part of it is to be translated into doing. You need to recognize these 10-step processes are completely nested like a ring. I'll skip this slide. It's a very heavy-duty slide. And here is what a strategic dashboard looks like. Risk, performance, structural or organizational risk, systemic or process risk. What goes into it is something that one define, can discuss. But these should be rolled out into operational parameters, which when measured and indexed will give the big policy framework how things are moving and happening. This is called a dashboard, and you need a scorecard. It's like cricket. Scorecard tells you what's the last batsman, what's the current batsman, the two batsmen who are over, and who's the last bowler and the second bowler. A scorecard does that. A scoreboard does that. But a scorecard or a dashboard gives you the entire picture of the game. Similarly, you need to measure it. And public policy requires a lot more rigorous measurement than we're currently doing. That's what delivers stakeholder value. I've already mentioned this. So what do we need? Policy cannot be independent of strategy. You define strategy, derive policy. Set up a structure which requires people who work with systems and sound processes using tactics to ensure operations and procedures. And when you do that, the source of data helps you define the index progress and helps you refine and respond. This is again a holistic system of measurement which is required for efficient execution. Now, in value creation, the two concepts are economic value and net economic value. One is value in exchange, one is value in use. And again, I stress, you cannot talk about volume without risk management. And risk management understanding is rather backward in our country, both at the corporate level and at the national level. Sorry about the expletive, but that is how the cartoon came, right? It's value in use and value in exchange. The poor egg fry is value in exchange. Right? Now, value in exchange is very useful for us. It's used for tourism, but we are using our infrastructure. We are not value in use. We use our infrastructure. Value in exchange is an economic. There's a transaction. You pay money and get money. Whereas when I go into the visit Taj Mahal, I'm not buying or selling anything. I'm only buying a ticket with the generation. You know, the hotel, the food, the transport, all that gets generated. This has to be understood, and it's again ill understood. And lastly, when you announce these things, the policy framer has to understand that stability is never a given. When change is announced, there's denial. This is based upon global research by Bob Garrett. When there's denial, there is fear. Then there's grieving and there is resistance. There's piloting and then there's demonstrating. I'm only giving the example of Aadhaar. How many court cases were filed? They'll steal my data. They will track me down. They will share it with Google, this, that. This is exactly the same thing. Now, can you imagine going out of your house without your Aadhaar? Okay. So in the ultimate analysis, when you're doing good public policy framing, you need to understand success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. Going back, you measure it as a dashboard or a scorecard. You start doing things. And then when you realize that you don't know anything, we start correcting it, making improvements and rolling it backwards. So you must admit what you don't know. Start working on understanding what you need to know. Start doing things. And when you're doing is inefficient, you have a course correction and a continuous improvement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for such an insightful and engaging session. I would now like to call upon Mukul sir to provide his views before we move on to the Q&A session. Over to you, sir. Mukul sir, would you like to add?
Yeah, thank you, Ram, for explaining very complex set of ideas which are taught at a high level public policy schools and not even there with such lucid manner and with such a rich set of examples. This is a presentation that I would suggest for the participants to keep on going back, save it, and keep on going back when you are thinking about public policies, knowing doing gaps, as it applies to India. of course, generally as well, but as it applies to India. Ram, thank you very, very
Welcome.
much. And look forward to your presentation tomorrow as well.
Good.
So we can take 2 questions, quick questions, if anybody has it.
I have one question posed by Rahul Yadav.
Yes, go ahead. Ram.
Good evening, sir. While evaluating public policies, we should prioritize short-term, medium-term, or long-term. It's a very standard approach. Basically, you have to combine all three. There's only a question of what more you can afford, what more is needed, and what less you can afford, and what less is needed. I will give you an example. If the PDF is providing enough food for the short term, the long term, should you look at providing more food or more nutritive food? Right? So the answer is very typical. You cannot bracket it into short term, medium term, and long term. And also, the fundamental mistake many policy planners make is they think a series of good short term achievements will kind of nest in and become a long term goal. No. The long term goal has to be very specific and clear. For example, we know how to melt and cast metals. We know how to machine metals. We know how to make machines. But does that mean we can automatically make a missile? No. The long-term goal, when you set, I want to make a missile, you realize that the metallurgy is different. You realize the electronics is different. You realize that the manufacturing skills are different. And you realize the machinery required are different. You require the skill set are required. The design strength are required. So short term, you can do, say, outsource work on missile or automotive production or defense production, which is what Bharat Forge did, which is what L&T did, all the Tatas did. But today, you realize after 10 years, they are all making their own missiles. Bharat Forge has come out with some phenomenal vehicles for the army in the front region. So L&T has come up with submarines. You can't make a submarine by saying, I'll make the hull today and make the engine tomorrow. You need to decide 20 years, 15 years from now, I'm going to be making submarines and here is what I need. Short term, I'll do this. Medium term, do this. Long term, I'll deliver submarines. Tejas code bole. Anonymous attendee. I've been told that
Yeah.
anonymous.
This
is me. Sorry, my name is Suvendu. I just didn't. That is me questioning. So by mistake, I put the send anonymous, Lisa. That was my question about framework.
Okay. There is no single framework for public policy. There is a knowing framework, there's a doing framework. Inside knowing, I have defined about 5 or 6 frameworks. Inside doing, I have only restricted myself in the interest of time to about 3 frameworks. Each framework has to nest into the other. What are these frameworks? Firstly, you need to have a scenario thinking framework where you're able to assess the plausibility of what's plausibly likely to happen in the future. It's not possibility. It's not a trend line that you extrapolate and say, today my car is growing at 60 mph. Day after, now that my infrastructure is good, all my new cars have to go at 100 mph. That's not the way it works. You need to understand what is plausible. Firstly, I'm questioning, do you think the next generation will be using this many cars? I suspect no. Right? Let's take housing. Do you think everybody will be building houses at this rate? Take the example of UK. Till our generation, or my generation, people were living in public housing, right? And my generation has gifted a lot of their houses which they built to their children. Children are no longer building homes in UK. They're buying resorts in Portugal, Spain, and France. So you see, that's the effective framework for policy, the formulation. If you do one thing, it will impact the other. There's another beautiful example in I forget the name of the place. They built I was driving past it when my cousin was driving me, told me this is a 1,000-bed hospital for treating heart, coronary diseases. This was in 2001, I think, or 2000. In 2004, we were driving the same route and I found only half the hospital working. So I asked him, what happened? He says, you see, they discovered statin and the number of coronary diseases in this region has come down. So half the hospital is now being converted into a maternity ward. Okay, so There is no question of an effortic framework policy, which is why I repeatedly mentioned that policy framing is work in progress, simply because the world around you is changing. The demands that we have on ourselves, the demands that our children have, and the requirements that our grandchildren have are all unique and different. And public policy is essentially about meeting the value proposition of my grandson, of my son, myself, my parents, and my grandparents. So it cannot be a single framework. And you cannot force fit a framework and say, this is it. There's nothing called this is it in public policy. All that I'm saying today, if you ask me 3 years from now, maybe I would have changed it. Mukul knows that this presentation has been radically changed since we last did it. Because that's the matter, right? You guys are you're living in an India which thinks and works differently to the Indias that we grew up. Okay. Any other question? Have I got your point of view across, Tejas?
Yeah, Shubhendu here. Yes, thank you very much. And one quick question to Dr. Mukul. I think, is there a way we can actually enable the participant chat so that the Q&A, I don't know why it is muted. So that's a question to the Tripti or the Arjun, because we don't get to see the participants.
Sure, we'll look into it. Just get back.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Policy,
Sorry, this is.
Yeah,
Just posted one question in the Q&A. Should I read it out?
Okay, can we move on?
Sir, last question we can take by Tejas ji.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Arjun. So essentially, the question is more about the project management being one of the most important skills for framing better policies, and we need to be transformative.
Right.
But more of the resourcing in the this particular space is more of generalists, the IS, etc., that we have, who are more of general managers if we compare it with our organizations, corporate. So do we need more specialists over there to, specific for certain specific policies, driving specific policies with better project management?
Not a question of better project management. There is no project management in India who are certified. There's an organization called Project Management International. And let's spend just 1 minute on comparing it. In routine, people who come out of the routine management, we are used to going into the morning, 8:30, we know what's going to happen. We know we have to provide this much of material, this much of resources, production has to be so much, afternoon I have to provide so much of packing cases, and it has to be dispatched to the customer. When a project manager goes in at the site to 8:30, firstly, he may not be able to go at 8:30. He may get a call at 6 o'clock and say, my lorry is stuck in the mud, please come. When he's unloaded it, he'll find that the material that has come is not quite what he asked for. And when he starts working, he will realize that the machine that was originally provided for piling is not suitable for the soil condition. And then he'll realize that the soil conditions, even though it was tested, the place at which it is being piled. So there's a lot of uncertainty in project management. It's a specialist skill. It's time bound. It has a start. It has a definitive end. It has a whole host of documentation that goes into it, a whole host of management systems, a whole host of governance systems that go into it. And from IMPRI's perspective, a 1-hour session on project management is something that I'm willing to do for you. We have done it many, many times, and I don't claim to be a project management specialist. But I'm a general manager who has done any number of projects and have put things together to ensure that the basic common sense works, but with specific methods. And let me also tell you, it's not about using linear programming. It's not about using agile manufacturing. It's all that is important. But understanding what a project is as a subset of a program, all these are critical dimensions. It's not only the executions have to understand, but the policy framers have also got to get into it. So the only institution I know is Project Management International, which is based out of Delhi. So you can check the net for them, and it's worthwhile getting qualified.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for answering all the questions. I would now like to invite Professor Mukul Ashar, visiting distinguished professor IMPRI, former Professor Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, National University of Singapore, NUS, to give the participants a deeper understanding of key concepts in fiscal diagnostics. Over to you, sir.
Ram, thank you again.
Welcome, sir. Just to conclude, I will send PDF. I'll send a PDF of this for circulation among participants. Right?
Thank you, sir.
I appreciate IMPRI inviting me to speak on this particular topic. Let me try to share my slides. Is this?
Yes, sir. Visible.
Is this okay? Fine. Now, this session has been titled as Key Concepts in Fiscal Diagnostics. Now, what do we do diagnosis? Usually it is associated with the medical profession. So when do we say some doctor is good? When we say that doctor can diagnose well. And so we have reality which is very complex. Fiscal systems are very complex of the countries. So we need to look at few things that are critical in trying to come to an assessment of where the real issues are in the fiscal system and what needs to be done about it. So this is a particularly difficult area in India. Before I start, we had Sanjeev Sanyal, who spoke to us last week. He has just given an interview since then, and he has said that India aims to make the rupee a hard currency over the period of a decade and increasingly use the INR in global transactions. This is a good news. It will have a lot of fiscal implications, but we won't get into it here. I just thought because he spoke to us, his interview since then may be of interest. Now, I've organized it as some introductory remarks, then an integrated framework to generate fiscal space, because we are talking about fiscal diagnostics, select indicators, and some concluding remarks. The importance of sound fiscal management in an era where everything relating to finance can be weaponized cannot be overemphasized. A lot of things are being weaponized, finance as well. How to consistently pursue sound fiscal management is very complex. So session can touch only on some selected aspects. It should be recognized that even though focus is on fiscal diagnosis, many wider sectoral and other policies, Ram gave many examples, impinge on fiscal variables. This is clear from the framework on generating fiscal space, which we'll talk about later. This is India's map. We should know that India has a central government, 28 states, 8 union territories. Union territory budget are controlled by the center. As of August 2022, there were a total of 766 districts. And that is not a constant number, up from 640 and then 593 before. There are many numerous urban and rural bodies, each with its own budget. So the fiscal diagnosis to be made is at all these levels: center, individual 28 states, union territories, districts, and urban and rural bodies. So under the Finance Commission or under the Constitution, Finance Commission of the Center recommends division of revenue between the center and the states and a lot of other things according to its terms of reference. 16th Finance Commission is to be announced in November 2023. State finance commissions perform this function by dividing revenue of a state between urban and rural bodies. I was very privileged that in 2016, I was appointed chairman of the State Finance Commission of Haryana to recommend division of Haryana taxes between urban and rural bodies and to make recommendations about how to make fiscal improvement. It was a great learning experience for me. Each finance commission makes recommendation for 5 years. That's the constitutional mandate. And if you want to see the 15th Finance Commission report, I'm giving you a link for that. Now, as far as the states are concerned, the very important document on state finances is the RBI study annual publication this is the handbook of statistics, not the state finance annual report of RBI. Now, according to the handbook 21-22 report, combined center and state aggregate receipts were INR 70.4 trillion, 29.8% of GDP, while disbursements were 30.6% of GDP. Now that's very high. 30% of GDP is intermediated through the state and center governments. More than half of all receipts and disbursements pass through the states, but there is little scrutiny of state and urban and rural finance. One of the weak areas of public finances in the country. Key question: are public amenities and quality of governance, and what Ramet described about public policies, are they commensurate with the above rather high ratios of receipts and disbursement that are intermediated through the government? And how can improvements be made? The central and state finance commissions do provide suggestions for improvements, but these are recommendations. The government can or cannot accept. Sometimes they accept in terms of words, but not in terms of spirit. The total expenditure of the center's budget in 2022-23 was 39.4 trillion rupees, while the total receipts were 22.8. So the non-borrowing receipts were only 60% about of expenditure. This needs to be increased. On a per capita basis, union expenditure alone, not the states, was 28,500 and in terms of expenditure and 16,522 in terms of receipts. So we need to look at the per capita expenditure as well. Suvendu, you have your hand up. Is there a question you want to ask?
No, sir. That I had earlier, so I've lowered it. Sorry about that.
All right. Now, let's just look at some definitional stuff out of the way. What is gross fiscal deficit? Measures the overall financial health of the state or central government, calculating by subtracting total revenue, which doesn't include borrowing, from total expenditure. A decrease in GFD is considered a positive sign. What are the measures of government deficit? Revenue deficit, which is revenue expenditure minus revenue receipts. Fiscal deficit, total expenditure minus revenue receipt plus non-debt created capital receipts. And the primary deficit is fiscal deficit minus interest payments. Now, let's look at the fiscal. This is a broad overview to give you the complexity and how high proportion of India's GDP is intermediated through the governments. A framework, and Ram gave a lot of frameworks. We have to realize that framework is not a blueprint to be followed exactly, but it is designed to facilitate thinking. It's very hard to apply a framework in the local context. Most policy advice fails because the consultants, whether World Bank, others, private consultants, they provide a framework, but the policymakers take this as a blueprint and apply it and fail because framework is much more difficult to apply. So we have a fiscal, how to generate fiscal space framework. What does it consist of? One is you have to enhance rate of economic growth through various means using growth drivers. Others, Ram mentioned how you could generate higher growth because all the revenue of government is function of economic growth. Growth is anemic, fiscal numbers will be anemic. Growth is robust, fiscal numbers will be robust. Then conventional taxes, that we have to broaden the tax base and increase the proportion of income that is reported. Only two ways. Then there are a lot of non-conventional sources, including the balance sheet of the government, public sector enterprise reform, regulatory levies, remittance, and so on. And then better expenditure management, including procurement management. So all these is something that when I've consulted many governments on their fiscal reforms, these are the kind of things that I would be looking for and asking the governments to provide the information. One of the interesting things that the central government will be making effective is called Mera Bill, Mera Adhikar. Hope you all understand that. Hindi, Mera Bill is my bill and Adhikar is my right. My getting a bill for what I pay is my right. Now that will increase formal inclusion in the GST tax net, in the income tax net, other excises, other type of taxes, and that will improve fiscal position. It will start on September 1. The other is you use technology to reduce expenditure. India's first 3D printed post office, which is called AM, additive manufacturing, was done in Bengaluru. 3D printing technology is a fast emerging way of constructing structures, uses computer-aided design to create three-dimensional objects through a layering method. And the Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati, had created a sentry post for the Indian Army using 3D. This is the post office created by 3D in Bangalore. Okay, so this cost fraction of the time and the money to construct as compared to regular construct. So your procurement reform of using that kind of technology is useful. The Indian Army has concluded 118 procurement contracts worth 16,000 crore over the last 15 months using the fast tech procedure and emergency powers delegated to it. So they can now, fast tech procurements can be done for defense purposes. This saves money. And they found instances of encroachment, unauthorized possession over immovable property. They were able to get around to that and improve the fiscal space. Now, when we look at India's tax rates, these are very reasonable compared to the others. Actually, since this chart was done, India is at 30. There are many that are higher. But since this was done, India has introduced new corporate rate where you pay 22% plus surcharge and no incentives, no set-off. Many corporates have adopted it as it simplifies corporate tax compliance. All I want to do is tell me what my profits are for tax purposes. I pay 22% plus surcharge, comes to around 25%. 25% in this regime, very competitive. So we have a global competitive rate for this, but there are still some reforms to be made. Now let's look at which cities' taxpayers paid most in direct taxes last year. Direct tax is the income tax, personal and corporate. Mumbai, 4.48 trillion rupees, what Mumbai paid. Then who is next? Bangalore, 1.69, way less. Delhi, 1.66, then all the others follow. So this whole idea that somehow one region of the country is paying a lot of taxes, the data-based analysis from the CBDT, Central Board of Direct Taxes, makes us rethink that. And Ahmedabad is only 0.7. Pune is higher than Ahmedabad, 0.86. So Maharashtra has a very good record of tax collection for the country. Then the tax compliance. The income tax returns have been increasing. They were 3.8 crore in 2013-14. They were 7.4 crore in 2022-23. And the UP and Bihar are seeing sharp rise in the return filings. So which is a good news that tax base is getting diversified across the country. The FM recently made a statement that the workforce share in population will rise to 45% in 2047. Taxable workforce will also rise to 85.3% from current 22%. There will be 48.2 crore income tax filers in 2047 as opposed to 7 crores. 7 to 48 is 7 times. Is tax department prepared for it? As if we apply Ram's way of looking, what is it that they would need to invest to get to be able to properly administer 482 million taxpayers, tax filers? So we are going to see a real transformation the economy. Now this was about income tax, corporate. This is about GST. What this tells you is where the GST was collected per person in 2022 from April to December period. Now, exact numbers don't matter, but the relativities matter. Maharashtra, Goa, 25,000. Maharashtra, 16. And Gujarat is 11,900. Tamil Nadu is 10,120. Kerala 56. Andhra 56. Telangana is 9,800. Karnataka 13,400, and so on. And on the other hand, Bihar is 9,409. So, and Bengal is 4,356. So we need to diversify these aspects as well. Haryana is 21,000, a small state per person. So we have got very good data now as to where the GST is collected, where the direct taxes are collected. So always go by empirical data. I mentioned before, how do I know what I know? My sources have to be reliable. Okay. Now, this is the RBI study on state finances, once a year, authoritative study, but not enough because once a year is too late, as Ram had pointed out. Now, 2021 report, the state's debt is expected to decrease to 29.5% as compared to 31.5%. But this is higher than 20% recommended by the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Review Committee in 2018. So states are anticipating some increase, but they need to, the report suggests, do debt consolidation should be priority for the state government. So in fiscal diagnostic, you look at the debt side, balance sheet side as well. The report is proposing that it would be beneficial to establish a fund that would be used to buffer capital expenditure during the periods of strong revenue growth. And to attract private investment, they should focus on creating a favorable environment for private sector to operate and grow. And that requires business-friendly policies, regulations, incentives, and higher interstate trade and commerce, which GST is helping to provide. So you can see that while we are talking about fiscal diagnostic, we are getting into many diverse areas. Now, capital outlay, let's look at now some indicators. I've already given you some, but capital outlay for development is a strong predictor of growth. So it includes economic, agriculture, industry, infra, social services, health education, and data suggests that we should especially worry about Bihar, West Bengal, and Punjab in terms of low capital outlay for development. You don't have capital outlay, you don't have future growth. These three states will struggle for future growth. Average for India is in red. Where did I get this? From Shamika Ravi on her Twitter. These are the capital expenditure in different states with red line, the India average. So that is the conclusion that she gave. Now, fiscal transparency indicator. A budget should include as many transactions of the public sector as possible in a transparent manner. To me, one of the most noteworthy and praiseworthy aspect of Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman's tenure is this, the quote, "The government of India has adopted a holistic policy towards fiscal stability in the last few years. Using the crisis as an opportunity to bring about reforms, the government undertook a series of policy measures in the previous few years. These policies range from bringing in budget transparency and using prudent assumptions in the budget, transforming the tax ecosystem by implementing technology, so-called process reform that Sanjeev Sanyal talked about, rationalizing GST, reducing tax rate, simplifying tax compliances, and ending the uncertainty around retrospective taxation. All these measures have led to a greater formalization of the economy, enhanced compliances, better reporting of the income by the public, and imparting credibility to the government's commitment to fiscal management. Today, India's budget numbers are respected. There are many countries I know whose budget numbers are not worth the paper that they are printed on. There is, however, scope for greater budget inclusiveness and transparency in some states. So here is the headline. States use off-budget borrowing to foot power subsidy bills. This is not a very transparent use. Utilization of extra budgetary resources of state PSUs. And this is in Andhra, Punjab, Telangana, Tamil Nadu, and West Bengal. So we need to address that. That's why we have rules about how much the states can borrow, how much guarantees they give. A lot of time PSUs will give, state will give guarantees to them. Guarantees don't cost anything, but if PSU can't pay, the contingent liability is on the state. Now, one of the things we look for is the debt. So this is a very nice chart globally, that here is the first set of countries with very high debt to GDP ratio, government debt to GDP ratio. This is government debt. Japan leads with 257%, and Greece is 207. Now, where are we? India is at 91. So it is not the lowest, but it is, not in the higher category either. But still, India needs to bring its government debt to GDP ratio down. Now, who the public debt? Who has how much? US has 31%, Japan 17%, China 9.8%. India, you cannot see it in here, but India is around 3-4%. And how national debt has soared from between 1995 2020. You can see Japan, Greece, US, Spain, UK, all soared. India relatively stable, 70 to 90. China 22 to 68. Korea 8 to 47. UAE 5 to 39. Okay, so India has done reasonably well in not letting the debt grow very rapidly. So now at the state level, again, what are the debt ratios? So which are the debts with states with high debt, government debt to GDP? This is from RBI report. Okay, so again, a source we can take with confidence. Punjab, 48%. Punjab has so little fiscal room, yet it is using policies that are reducing its future growth. Punjab is a state to worry a lot on fiscal front. Himachal, 42. very high. Who are the high ones? Goa, 39. Kerala, 39. So Kerala is another state we need to worry a lot about. Can they pay salaries, let alone pensions, which they want? Bengal, 35. Jharkhand, 34. Bihar, 38. UP, 32. On the other hand, Gujarat is 19.5. Maharashtra is 19. Okay, so whoever says, oh, southern states have got great fiscal, this doesn't support. And this is from RBI. Always look at data, always. In a column, Samika Ravi argues that administrative expenditure to net state domestic product varies considerably among states, and more research needs to be done to see how it can be brought down. That's another indicator. Land records and property rights. DeBroy et al. Have argued that center and state should prioritize improving land records and property rights so citizens can use them for participating in financial and capital market. Swamita scheme that center has started is doing that. Drone technology can be used to demarcate urban and rural. And in our Haryana report, we recommended to the Haryana government that all the panchayat and rural land should be demarcated by drones so that whoever is encroaching on that land, panchayat land, can be identified and it can be monetized to help panchayats provide better services. So this is the DeBroy et al. Now notice how the wealth Ram mentioned about more and more millionaires being created. Richest village in the world is Madhapur village located in Gujarat, and the village have a total deposit of 5,000 crore in over 17 banks. So that's a very, wealth is spreading. Here is the how much for every 100 rupee paid in direct tax, direct, not indirect, how much each state gets. Now notice who gets the most. Who would you expect? UP, 333. For every 100 they pay, they get 333 back. Bihar, 922. Jharkhand, 303. And Chhattisgarh, 282. On the other hand, how much does Gujarat get? Or how much does Maharashtra get? 7.7. And Gujarat, 31.3. So who are the other low ones? Not many who are as low as these two. TN is 29.7. That's low. Karnataka, 13.9. That's low. And so on. But Northeast gets a lot back. And so this is the way the study of the budget by the Ministry of Finance, Department of Revenue. These are again official figures. The other procurement area is the government e-marketplace, a digital tool established in 2016. Nearly 15 million orders have been placed. The merchandise value of USD 51 billion since the inception of the system. And we need to improve on that on the procurement cost. Other is you collect revenue through greater technology. 9 years ago, toll collection from highways was 4,777 crore. Now it is 41,342 crores. In terms of highway length, India has overtaken China as the world's second largest national highway now. And Nitin Gadkari had said he would like to get 1 lakh crore from tolls over time. Then you try to reduce fraud. Total population of West Bengal is 8 crores 78 lakh. Ration cards 11 crore. How can that be? Government found fake ration cards 2 crores 78 lakhs during Aadhaar and the card link exercise. Means beneficiary does not exist. So you save money. This is how you improve your fiscal health. And when I do fiscal diagnostic analysis, I've done it for Sri Lanka, Indonesia, a lot of countries, and some states, UP, and others. These are the kind of things I would be asking. Do not just analyze impact of a tax or expenditure. Emphasize subsequent effects from a systemic perspective. 2 examples from GST. How GST sparked growth in textile industry. So GST replaced multiple indirect taxes. Centralized warehouse saved cost, improved logistics. They provided tax benefits, boosting exports. And the real estate sector, because of the amendments, all the applicable taxes are replaced by unified system, and they enable optimal tax management. And notice that if you don't manage at a local level your fiscal system well, what is the outcome? Here is a city of Birmingham in the United Kingdom, which has officially declared itself bankrupt. Cannot pay. How does it run? So local finance needs a lot more attention. They need resources, and there is recognition. 16th Finance Commission that will be set up will make a lot of very direct recommendations for our urban and rural bodies. PM Awas Yojana, first order impact, 40 million houses constructed, given to the poor. Second order impact, millions of jobs created in rural sector, which in turn created its own various cycles of consumption and growth. Third order impact, who are now empowered with own home, thus become more confident, enterprising, sense of dignity, and they contribute to growth and innovation. A lot of things are happening in small towns. Talent, a lot of talent is there. This is the remittances I talked about, 110 billion or so annual inward remittance to India. And a lot of it is coming from the United States, UAE, UK, then Singapore, Saudi Arabia. These are the main ones, but there are a lot others out of this, which are nearly 1/3. So Indian diaspora is spread out, and it's getting remittances from there. Okay, so that is the presentation on the different aspects of the fiscal diagnostics. So the concluding remark is that when you are doing fiscal diagnosis, when IMF under Article 4, every country has an obligation to have an Article 4 consultation with IMF. IMF looks at their fiscal scenario and they do recommendations. IMF looks at much wider things of the type that I have mentioned, and I only mentioned some. They look at even more granular details in order to make recommendations recommendations about the fiscal health of the country and what needs to be done about it. Okay, so the I hope that this presentation has given you some idea of how to do diagnostic analysis of the fiscal system. Thank you very much. I am open to questions.
Thank you, sir, for this enlightful session. We have a few questions in the chat box. Should I read that out?
Yes, would you like to read them?
Sure.
One
Or
by
we
one?
could have the people, if they want to ask their own questions.
Yeah, right. Let the people ask. That's fine.
Participants, I request you to raise your hand if you have any questions. Dr. Shruti Sharma.
Who wants to start?
Saurabh-ji, please kindly unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, good evening. Hello, doctor. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Hi, Dr. Mukul. Thank you so much for this session. So I just had one query. So we live in this world of data. Now, in most occasions, we see that data isn't updated, or data may be in some form or in retrospective. So if one has to do a diagnostic view on data which is retrospective in nature, what is the best approach to then come to a diagnosis of a economy or a scenario?
I'm sorry, I don't understand your question. Can you repeat this? Somebody repeat this. I didn't get fully your question.
So one sec.
Mukul, may I step in?
Yeah, please do.
The basic question, and correct me if I'm wrong, Saib, is we have a lot of data.
Yes, sir.
Are we using it the way it should be?
Exactly, sir. Exactly my point. And also, what if the data is retrospective in nature, or it's not updated? Like today we are on 8th September. Suppose I have a data which is 3 months old or 2 months old. Then what is the best approach to do a correct diagnosis if the data is old?
Mukul, may I field this question?
Please do. I appreciate that.
You see, basically, you have to differentiate between data and information.
Okay, sir.
Lot of data does not mean lot of information. Okay.
Okay.
So if you want to have information and if you want to use information, you must know what that information implies. If you have to use that information, you need to understand what are the outcomes that you have specified and how this information relates to that. I'll give you an example.
Sure, sir.
If you look at the salesman, a typical metric for data that the salesman delivers is, I contacted customer A, customer B, customer D. I spoke about this product. I spoke about that product, this, that. I visited 22 customers in the last week. Brilliant. He's covered 300 kilometers. But is a salesman meant to sell goods, or is it meant to meet customers?
Sell goods, primarily sell goods.
That's the information I want.
Yes.
Right. There's a story of, this is a little bit of a funny story. There was this Indian who was hired by a departmental store in the US. At the end of the day, his manager asked him, how many sales did you make? He said 1. So the manager got very irritated. He says, anyway, what was the sale? He says, this gentleman came in asking for a fishing hook. And then I told him about the newest fishing reel that we had. And when he saw the newest fishing reel, I gave him a lot of things about how about the tackle that he can add into this. And then I went and sold him a boat, which can take him in shallow waters. And my total sales for the day was $1.4 million. Okay. So the data, data does not equate to information. I'll give you another practical example. The number of purchase orders you need, the number of GRNs that you need, the number of delivery orders that you need, All that goes into an
Mhm.
account system is data. The information is, I placed an order for X at a value of Y to be delivered by the end of the month. I have received X minus delta X at a cost of Y plus delta Y, and it has come 3 months late.
Understood.
So you need to be very focused with clarity on what's the difference between information and data. I'll give you another example.
Data.
You can give the same electrocardiogram
Hmm.
engineer who understands what a graph is, but can he make head or tail of it that a cardiologist is able to make out of it?
No.
Will a general practitioner make head or tail out of what the cardiologist makes?
No, sir. No.
So you need to tailor the information to take a decision. Data does not help you take decisions. Data gives you clutter. Information helps with decision making.
That's why I need a framework.
Yes.
So data cannot
Understood.
be used mechanically.
And that is why I mentioned about the
Okay.
dashboard and the scorecard in the earlier session.
Yeah.
If you have
Yes,
attended.
sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And noted, sir. Noted.
So I hope all of you can see how Ram and my presentations are complementary.
20 years, Mukul.
Okay. That's right. Okay. Next question, Dr. Shruti.
Thank you, sir, and good evening. Thank you for very nicely elaborated talks today. I wanted to ask, sir, about how you have mentioned about the fiscal diagnostics. I was very intrigued to ask the question that where in Indian economy setup we are, on the Laffer's curve, and what in terms of the policy imperatives it is mandated, to make the public urge to earn not decline, whilst we also want to broaden the tax collection over the years.
Sorry, I don't know why, but voice is breaking when it comes out. Ram, did you hear it?
I heard it, but I'm clueless about it. It is about the Laffer's curve relating to India.
Hello, can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, say your question again.
Yes,
more
sir.
clearly.
Sir, I wanted to ask that on a Laffer's curve, where do we stand as an Indian economy? And whilst we are progressing to broaden the tax collection that we want to over the upcoming years, how do we not counter the public urge to earn, which is spontaneously going to decline over the time, as the taxes are going to increase? So how do we manage that from a public policy imperatives?
Okay. First, let me just say that Laffer's curve is not a very useful concept for policy making. And it's a formula for a parabola. It's a mathematical formula, not an economic formula. Nobody has been able to come up with Laffer curve for the economy as a whole. For small items, you can apply that, but not for the economy. Next, way we are going about is not raising taxes. GST has reduced taxes compared to pre-GST periods on many things. Income tax, I just gave you an example of the corporate income tax. Now, 25% is all you have to pay. That's very globally competitive. How we are trying to increase our revenue? By broadening the base. Before GST was introduced, indirect taxes had taxpayers about 65 lakh. Today, we have 135 lakhs. That's raising base to increase revenue. Second, we are using AI. Income tax department has become very savvy, sometimes too savvy. They don't always understand that these are instruments to be used in a very nuanced way. But they now, GST and income tax, your PAN number has got your GST number in there, or vice versa. GST has a PAN number in there. So now the income tax department can join them together. So a lot of revenue is coming from having people declare greater proportion of their income than before. And these are the two very important ways, plus our high growth. Our growth is expanding. I showed you richest village in the world. So villages are now, more and more people are coming. I showed you in the last lecture how many middle class people will be generated. All of that will increase revenue. The Laffer curve is a mathematics. Think of it as mathematics, not economics.
Thank you so much, Mukul sir and Ramakrishnan sir. Thank you for that perspective, sir.
That was classic Mukul, the last one-liner.
Thank you, sir, once again.
Rahulji, you can ask your question.
Yes, Rahulji, you can unmute and ask. Sonalji have also raised hand. Sonalji, you can also go.
Yeah, hi, good evening, Professor. I just want to inquire and ask about policy-based, evidence-based policy making. Is it part of your comfort zone? And especially when you're doing thinking out of the box is what you really talked about in policy framework. How does that work in the current scenario?
You want me to take that?
Yeah, please.
Let's take the word evidence-based. Evidence itself means it is something historic, right? It is something that has already happened. And the posit is, if it happened last year, it's going to happen next year, which is why I specifically mentioned, don't go by trend analysis, go by scenario analysis. Let's take, for example, in 2014, what was your telephone bill? And what is your broadband bill in 2023? If you had extrapolated your 2014 or 2013 telephone bill, you'll probably be paying 150 rupees today. Whereas the landline is free in most places. So evidence-based has value as it made in the chart. Look behind you, find out what has happened, and more importantly, why it has happened. Then look around you, look above you, look below you, people who are less fortunate than you, people who have done more than you. Then look at the side, people who are your peers, and then try to come at something that you look through, right? For example, another example, evidence-based, if you look at DRDO, they were sending about 5 rockets or 6 rockets a year for many years, and they were doing a good job of it. There's no question about it. But today, how many rockets are they sending? How many satellites are they spending? So if you had used evidence and had extrapolated it, you would not have provided for the infrastructure to grow. Ditto with HAL. They didn't make a Tejas in 25, 30 years. Today, the plan is to make some 15, 16 Tejas a year. Look at agriculture. What is our variety and spread today in agriculture? We could not, historically, our storage was in buildings, and many of it in ramshackle buildings, and we destroyed a lot and fed the rats and the insects more than we fed our people. Today, that evidence is no longer valid because we are rapidly moving into silo-based structures, which can be fumigated, which can be saved from the weather inclinations. So evidence base provides some learning, but it is more for analysis rather than for decision making. Have I answered your question, ma'am?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can I just ask one more question, sir? What, in terms of policy making and framework, how much is cherry picking of data, causing skews?
Very common because it's based upon the zone of comfort and people only want to analyze the data that comes within their framework. It's like telling a patient you have cancer. They don't want to believe it. They'll only believe it. They'll keep changing doctors till the person who tells them this is a minor illness. Right?
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So here, one last question. Rahulji isn't able to unmute, so I'll read it out. It says, good evening, sir. As you mentioned, states get a larger share of money from the union budget. How can the central government ensure better utilization of the funds?
Yes.
So was I audible?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, just say it again.
Sure. As you mentioned, states get a larger share of money from the union budget. How can the central government ensure better utilization of the funds?
Who gets the largest?
So the question says that states get a large
state.
share of money. Yeah.
No, the largest proportion, or more than 50%, is intermediated through the state. So the Finance Commission will say that here is how the tax should be shared. 41% of certain taxes automatically goes to the state as a matter of right. Okay. Then there are a lot of schemes the central government spends through the states, various types of projects, and so on. But in our country, capacity and willingness to do state level fiscal research is very limited. Only RBI's annual report on state finances gives you something. But even NIPFP, the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, has very little on state. So we need to encourage that. So when I was chairman of the Haryana Finance Commission, we provided a special grant to set up Haryana Institute of Fiscal Policy and Management to collect data throughout the year, to do the analysis, to see that, so that the urban and rural bodies, they get the funds that they require, their effectiveness is monitored, and so on. But unfortunately, the government accepted our recommendation, but did not implement it in the spirit we suggested. So it is not very effective at this point in time. But we need to do more. And the 15th Finance Commission was very firm on having more on urban and rural bodies. And 16th Finance Commission, I suspect, will have more effective measures to address this issue. We need to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of state government finances.
Mukul, if I may come in, I think the question was, what can the central government do to improve the deployment of resources by state governments? Please correct me if I'm wrong, madam.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, they are doing certain things like the public finance management system. Recently, West Bengal did not get Manrega funds because they were not meeting the conditions for getting those funds. So now state as center has set up a lot of mechanisms, the PFMS, the conditionalities, others for the states to get funds. And those that don't meet those criteria don't get funds. But who is the loser? The country and the state, particularly the citizens of that state, which are not meeting the conditions. So this is a tough area. This is to get the coordination issue between the center and the states is a challenge. And that's part of our federal structure. So the lot of schemes are central, money is central, but implementation is by the state. That's many different outcomes, many different effectiveness. We are trying, but states have their certain rights under the Constitution. They have responsibilities too, but usually rights are more emphasized than the duties and the responsibilities, both at the state level, at the individual level. And so we need to keep on worrying. it's a work in progress.
Right. Thank you so much, sir, for that answer. And with that, I think we'll wrap up the session for today. So as we come to an end of day 2 of a 1-month immersive online intermediate certificate training course on contours of public policy in India in the Amrit Kaal, I, Tripta Behra, researcher, IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI, Center for the Study of Finance and Economics, CSFE, New Delhi. We are grateful to our experts for day 2 of this course, Mr. V. Ramakrishnan and Professor Mukul, for taking out their valuable time and giving an opportunity to the participants to learn from this online certificate program. We thank all of our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's deliberation. We look forward to welcoming you tomorrow, that is the 9th of September, at 6 p.m. for the third day of this certification course by distinguished experts, Professor Sachidanand Mukherjee, Mr. V. Ramakrishnan, and Dr. Ashish Chandorkar. We are grateful if you are watching us later on YouTube or listening to our various podcasts or reading our publications. We hope you continue to join in future to our IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning. Wishing you all a very good evening. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you.